Welcome to True Drew Podcast, your source for all things Nancy Drew. I'm your host, Avery, and on this podcast, we'll discuss everything from the Nancy Drew books, to computer games, to movie adaptations, and TV shows. Nothing is off the table. So if you're a True Drew, you'll definitely want to tune in for this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome back to True Drew Podcast. I actually just got back to the States not too long ago, just like 2 days ago, but it was so fun. I got to go on a trip with my family to Eastern Europe. So we got to see Austria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, which are a few places that I felt like I didn't know very much about, but after going, I feel like I've learned so much about. It's really interesting too. I don't know if you ever do this when you go on trips, but I always see things that remind me of either the Nancy Drew books or the Nancy Drew games, and I felt like that happened a lot on this trip. Like in Hungary, for example, we saw the Harry Houdini Museum, famous magician. My husband is actually a magician, so he loves Harry Houdini, has read a lot of books about him. So we got to see that museum, and that's actually where Harry Houdini is from, and I'm currently reading a biography about him because I read one several years ago, and it's been a while, so I was like, I want to read more about Houdini. I think that would be really fun. Also, in the Czech Republic, of course, the latest Nancy Drew game, Mystery of the Seven Keys, was in Prague. So it was really neat getting to walk around Prague. I felt like Nancy Drew. I felt like I was in the game because Her Interactive did such a good job with the details. Like there are certain doors in the square around the castle and the astronomical clock that are in the game. So it was pretty wild. There's also another little tie-in to the Final Scene computer game. There's a famous Czech artist, his name is Alphonse Mucha, and he was an artist that did a lot of Art Nouveau paintings, I believe in the early 1900s. But if you think of like the Paris metro signs, those curly, green, vine-looking signs, his style is very similar to that. But in the Final Scene game, when we go to the basement in the Royal Palladium and we open the safe, there's that little box that we have to unscramble the tile puzzle on, and that is one of Alphonse Mucha's most famous paintings, the Zodiac. So there's a whole museum in Prague dedicated to him, so I thought that was so neat. I actually got a little souvenir magnet, and my mom ended up getting me a bookmark with that Zodiac painting on it, so I was like, this just reminds me of the Nancy Drew game, so very cool. But it was a much needed trip. I can't wait to share some more content about that over on Instagram, but for now, we're going to jump into the very next Nancy Drew book that we have scheduled for today. It is number 94, The Picture Perfect Mystery, and this book came out in 1990. So there's actually a couple cover variations for this book. I only have one in my collection, but the first one, the one that I have, it shows Nancy. She's got very blonde hair. She looks very similar to the iteration of Nancy on the last book that we talked about, but she's wearing a dark navy pencil skirt, a blue silk top. We can see a painting kind of behind her, and she's in front of what looks like a dressing room mirror, and there's a man in a suit in the reflection of the mirror staring at her. And if I am to believe correctly, I think this is a scene in the book where she goes to this theater and she's interrogating someone. But there is a little tagline on this book cover, and it says, Nancy takes a guided tour in a gallery of thieves. Now the second edition of this book cover, which I don't have, it's kind of a similar cover. It's a yellow book instead of a light blue book, and it's pretty much the same scene. Nancy's in front of this mirror, but she looks more shocked, and she's holding something in her hand. There's a painting behind her, but she's wearing an all-white outfit, like a white t-shirt and a white and red striped skirt. It, for some reason, makes me think of a baseball uniform. You know what I mean? Like the striped pants that they wear, or softball uniform. It's a brave look, because I'm going to tell you what, like, I don't have any white clothing. I don't think in my entire closet. I just don't trust myself around white clothing. I get stains on stuff real easy. I just don't live that kind of life, you know? I'm a messy person. Come to think of it, why do they wear white pants so often in baseball and softball? Because they get dirty so fast. Oh well, not my problem. So anyways, the funny cover spoof that I came up with for these covers was, can I help you? Or, where are the raspberry lemonade jelly beans I requested, you peasant? Because it looks like the guy on both of these covers looks really mad at Nancy, and he could almost be like the temperamental artist type. You know, you hear about like people when they get famous, they have these weird requests and they're super demanding. And ask for bizarre things. That was just the scenario I was picturing in my head. But if I had to give these book covers a rating, I would probably give them 3.5 magnifying glasses. I think it's interesting that they took the exact scene and they just altered it a little bit. It seems like when the Nancy Drew books get new covers, they choose like an entirely different scene. So I thought it was interesting that they just took the same scene and just kind of barely tweaked it and updated it. Nancy's not exactly how I picture her here, but I do like the covers. Also, if you want to see these book covers that I'm talking about, you can check them out on my Instagram, True Drew Podcast. I usually post these the day before these episodes air on Thursdays. So now let's go ahead and list the characters that we encounter in the Picture Perfect mystery. So first up, we have Lila Cramer, who is an artist, her daughter Leanne, Rodney Walden, Annette Hoops, who is the gallery manager where Lila sells her art, Mike Hawkins, who is just a kid on a bike, Jennifer Williams, who owns the Red Door Gallery, another artist gallery in town, Agatha Wilson, and I just put Duck Lady in parentheses. You'll see what I'm talking about later. Millie the Duck, she gets an honorable mention, which, I wonder if they named her Millie as a nod to Mildred Wirt Benson. If they did, that's super cute. Clark Drummond, who is an actor, and Kathy Stark, who works for Jennifer Williams. Okay, so now really quickly I'll read a synopsis for the Picture Perfect mystery. A con artist has pulled off a near-perfect crime, switching contracts with famed local painter Lila Cramer. Nancy has just 4 days to catch the artful dodger, or Lila will have to forfeit her entire collection. But the scheme proves to have been most carefully conceived and concealed. The investigation leads Nancy into a maze of misleading disguises, unsigned notes, and anonymous phone calls. She will have to draw on all her deductive powers to paint the picture-perfect mystery's elusive mastermind into a corner. And now for a dramatically read newspaper headline synopsis. Stroke of genius. Nancy Drew solves baffling art con. And now we'll go ahead and jump into the direct quotes and notes that I took down for the Picture Perfect mystery. So our story starts with Nancy and Bess going to the Cramer Art Gallery where local artist Lila Cramer displays her work. She's become very famous lately and she has a studio in a house that's been converted to her workspace. We also are told pretty early on that George is on vacation, so she's not really in any of this book, I don't think. And I give George Fane a hard time, but I do miss her when she's not in the books. It's so nice when we get the whole trio, Nancy, Bess, and George, and then bonus if we get Ned sometimes. I like that too. But the book says it's a summer morning and Nancy and Bess are wearing light blouses and denim skirts. As they go up the steps to the art gallery, Nancy warns Bess that the artist they're getting ready to talk to is eccentric, and Bess says as successful as she is, she can afford to be. She's one of the best watercolorists in the country, and we get the impression that Nancy and Carson have known Lila and her daughter Leanne for quite a while. They go way back. So Nancy introduces Bess to Lila, and she explains that Carson bought a painting from her. And Lila calls out to Leanne, her daughter, and asks if the painting is ready. Leanne says it is, and she leaves the room to go get it. Lila goes on to say that her life is her work, and art is the most important thing in her life. And Nancy looks over quickly, and she's glad to find that Leanne hasn't come back with the painting yet, because she's sure if she'd heard her mom say that, her feelings would have been a little bit hurt. But Lila tells them she has an exhibit in 4 days, and she has been so busy. She tells them they'll have to excuse her, and she walks off. Leanne comes back, meanwhile, with the painting, and Bess wants to see it. So Leanne unwraps it, and it's of a small blue-eyed girl with reddish blonde hair standing on the bottom rail of a split-rail fence surrounded by flowers. So Nancy says Lila took the picture of Nancy when she was younger, and she and Leanne were on a play date. Lila painted the scene and then told Carson about it, and he had to have it. It's kind of cool because I've been reading the original text Nancy Drew books over on my subscription podcast, True Drew Files, and I just finished reading The Mystery of the Moss-Covered Mansion, and in that book, Nancy has a painting of her done, and she gives it to Carson as a gift. So this is the second time in the series I think that that's happened. So Nancy, Bess, and Leanne are all standing there, and Lila buzzes back through the room. Like, you could tell she just has all this frantic energy because she's trying to get ready for this exhibit, but she tells Nancy she got a good deal. Then she leaves again. But Bess says to Leanne it must be nice and exciting to be around the world of art all the time, and Leanne sadly says, yeah. Now, as they're standing there, a man comes in who's a customer, so Leanne has to go off and help him, and Nancy quietly tells Bess that Lila used to be very different before she got famous, and she had a lot more time for Leanne. Now, all of a sudden, a kid on a bike comes into the gallery and Nancy yells at him to stop, but he crashes into an easel and one of Lila's paintings goes down. Yeah, not exactly the place you want to be riding a bike around, in a artist's gallery full of all these fragile things. So Nancy goes over to the boy to check on him while Leanne scoops up the painting. And it appears to be okay, but Nancy has a stern talk with the boy and says an art gallery is no place to ride a bike. So after the boy gets up and brushes himself off, he starts to ride the bike back out of the gallery, but Nancy repeats, "A gallery is no place to ride a bike," and she makes him walk the bike outside. Now, meanwhile, a man has come from the back of the gallery, and he comes up front and says he heard a commotion. He introduces himself as Rodney Walden, and he talks to Nancy and says he's been telling Lila to shut the door to the gallery, and he seems mad and really annoyed about it. He's kind of like, "I told her to shut the door or else things would come in and disrupt everything," and he just seems like really gruff and just really annoyed with everything. But Leanne goes back to helping the customer who came in, and he buys a painting and then leaves. So Leanne goes to shut the door after this, leading outside, and she sees someone else coming in. So she introduces this lady as Annette Hoops, the gallery manager, to Nancy and Bess. Meanwhile, Rodney, the guy that came out of the back, he's like an assistant and helps around the gallery, is still mouthing off, and he says Lila should be more careful with the art in the gallery and should care about things other than herself. Ouch. He also tells Annette that Lila treats her like crap. He's like got an axe to grind. He does not like Lila for some reason. But Leanne tells him that's enough, and Rodney walks off. Which of course she's going to do that. That's her mom. She's going to defend her mom. So Nancy and Bess say they have to go, and they leave with the painting that Lila did of Nancy when Leanne runs out to them before they even get to their car in a panic. She says she accidentally sold all of her mother's paintings for the price of one to that last customer. Ugh, that's really bad, especially when you consider how long it takes to make a painting. Like some people, it takes literally months or years to make a really good painting. And Leanne just sold all of her mom's work in one go, but for a very discounted rate. So Nancy takes a look at the bill of sale, and sure enough, it says the man is entitled to all of Lila Cramer's paintings. So Leanne says it looked like he added a few words to the sales slip when she stepped away to check on the painting that the kid on the bike knocked over. Leanne says her mother will absolutely kill her. So Nancy says not to panic, she'll see if she can find the boy on the bike. So Bess walks around the corner and she sees the boy, but he leaves his friends and takes off on his bike. So Nancy and Bess chase him, and when he looks over his shoulder, he goes over a rut and falls off his bike. Nancy, of course, makes sure he's okay first, but then she grabs his arm to make sure he doesn't leave. And the first thing out of this kid's mouth is, "I didn't do anything," and Nancy says, "I never said you did." But he says his name is Mike Hawkins, and Nancy says the man in the gallery cheated someone and played a mean joke. She asks the boy if he knows anything about it. She asks if Mike was paid to ride through the gallery by the man who was a customer, and he says yes, a whole $5. And he shows them 40 cents left over and says he bought balloons, candy, and gum with it. That didn't take too long. But Nancy asks if he can tell her anything about the man who bought the paintings, and he says he hangs out in the park sometimes and likes bologna sandwiches. So after talking a little bit longer, Nancy lets Mike go on his way. So when Nancy and Bess go back in the gallery, Leanne is talking to Annette and Rodney and making them promise not to tell her mother until they have things sorted out. Annette agrees, but Rodney sneers and says it's pathetic that Lila's own daughter is scared of her. Leanne also mentioned casually earlier to Nancy and Bess that Rodney is an artist and understands how intense the days leading up to an exhibition can be. Is he jealous of Lila's success? Did he have something to do with this sabotage? Nancy can't understand why he works at the gallery if he hates Lila, but Rodney finally agrees begrudgingly, and he says he won't tell Lila. So Nancy and Bess are hanging around in the gallery with Leanne when Lila comes back, and Nancy mentions there was some excitement while she was gone, and before she even knows what happened, Lila is absolutely hysterical. She starts going, What happened?" So Nancy exchanges a look with Leanne and quickly tells Lila that a boy came in on a bike and knocked over a painting, but it's okay. Lila goes to look at it and she says it does seem to be fine. She also mentions she can't wait for Jennifer Williams to eat her heart out when Lila's own paintings win at the exhibit. Now after she walks off, Nancy asks Leanne who that is, and she says Jennifer Williams is a rival painter who owns the Red Door Gallery in town, but the two artists have very different styles. So after Lila walks off, Leanne quietly asks Nancy if she can help her, and Nancy agrees. She's only got 4 days to help track down this guy and make sure that he doesn't become entitled to all of Lila's paintings. So Nancy borrows the sales receipt to take to her dad. She's she's probably going to have him look it over and assess the legitimacy of it. Because after all, Leanne signed it, but she didn't read it. But she did sign it, which is really unfortunate. But the next day, over some of Hannah's coffee cake, Nancy tells Hannah and Carson what happened, and she shows her father the receipt. He says Leanne did sign it, but there are witnesses, Nancy and Bess, that could attest that Leanne was deliberately distracted. But Lila probably wouldn't like the kind of publicity that this case would bring to her art. So Nancy explains Lila actually doesn't know yet, and she only has 3 days now before the exhibition to try and solve this. So Carson says, as usual, just be careful. So Nancy and Bess head to the Cramer gallery in Nancy's blue Mustang, according to the book. I think up to this point it's just been called a roadster in the very early books and then a sports car throughout the 60s and 70s, and so now it's specifically a Mustang. Pretty cool. But Nancy and Bess go inside the gallery and Leanne is a nervous wreck, but Nancy just asks her to come with them. So they all go to the park where Mike, the kid on the bike, said he'd seen the man hang out sometimes, and they decide to do a stakeout to see if he comes. Leanne points out the fence near the duck pond where Nancy stood as a girl in the painting that her mother did. Nancy also asks Leanne about Rodney, and she says he's a very talented artist who started working at the gallery a year ago. Leanne says she thinks he wanted Lila to mentor him and loved her work, and her mother has hung up some of his pieces in the gallery, so he has kind of been mentored by Lila up to this point. Nancy also asks about Annette, and she's told that she started working at the gallery just 2 months before Rodney did. She was married for a year, but her husband died, and she's a very private person in general. So Nancy decides to go to the other side of the pond to talk to this older lady who's hanging around feeding the ducks to see if she's seen the man they're looking for. She says her name is Agatha Wilson and she calls one of the ducks Millie. She says she's seen the young boy Mike, but not the man they're looking for. But Miss Wilson does point out a group of people in the parking lot and says they come to the park a lot and maybe they would know the man they're looking for. So the girls approach the group and Nancy tries to flag them down, but 2 of the women and 1 man jump into a van and leave. The only man left sees Nancy, his eyes widen, and he runs off into the woods. So Nancy chases after him and trips, but gets back up and keeps going. She finds her way to the other side of the park where the book says there's a Ferris wheel and a carousel. I wonder if this is the same park and merry-go-round from the Haunted Carousel book. It might be. But Nancy looks around for the man and she spots him on the carousel. So she goes to buy a ticket, gets on, and sneaks up behind him. She clamps a hand on his shoulder and says she just wants to talk to him, but then he takes off running again. So Nancy jumps off the carousel, searches for him, but then he sneaks up behind her, clamps a hand over her mouth and says, "Back off, you hear me? If you want to stay healthy, mind your business." And then he shoves Nancy down and runs away. So Nancy hurries back to the park to find Bess and Leanne, who are worried sick about her. But Nancy says she thinks the man resembles the guy from the gallery the other day, but she can't be sure. But why else would he run away from her? So Bess says she and Leanne followed the people in the van and they went down the street to this place called the Applause Dinner Show Theater. And Leanne mentions that Annette saw the show and said it was good. But Nancy says there's obviously a connection and the man knows the people from the theater and maybe he's even an actor himself. So Nancy tells Bess she always did like showbiz and they should definitely go check it out. So Nancy, Bess, and Leanne buy tickets to the dinner show and they go, and the show requires some audience participation. They're told to boo and hiss at the villain and sigh for the heroine, that sort of thing, and they cheer for the hero. And the hero, Lance Goodman, looks very handsome according to Bess, and Nancy thinks he looks familiar to her. But Bess says he can't be the con man, he's too handsome. That's always Bess's response. Whenever someone is attractive, she's like, well, they can't be a bad person. So after the first act of the play, Nancy says she wants to get into Clark Drummond's, the guy who plays Lance's, dressing room. So during the second act, they go backstage and they do. Nancy looks around with Bess while Leanne stands watch. And while Clark is on stage, Nancy finds how Clark disguised himself at the gallery the other day. He used some latex to make a false nose, some glasses, and a mustache. But then, all of a sudden, Clark walks into the dressing room. He's furious to see them in there and he tells them to get out, but Nancy demands answers from him. Leanne has also come into the room at this point and she guiltily is like, I didn't see him coming until he was like right on top of me. So Clark tells them he's in the middle of a show and if he wasn't, he'd, and then Nancy interrupts
interrupts him here and says, "Call the police," and she tells him to go ahead and call Chief McGinnis, and he loses some of his bravado. So Nancy asks him if he was at the Cramer Art Gallery the other day, and he tries to deny it, but then Nancy holds up the glasses and the mustache, and Leanne says it's him, she recognizes him. She gets really teary-eyed, and she asks why he would cheat her and her mother out of their paintings, and Clark starts to feel bad, and he says they seem like nice people. So he tells Nancy he received a letter in the mail saying he would get $200 if he went to the Cramer Gallery, caused a distraction, and wrote something to the effect that he would be entitled to all the paintings on the sales slip. He was also told to take the one painting he got to the bus station and leave it in locker 330. He received $300 in the mail directly after he did that. So Clark says he's sorry, and Bess believes him, but Nancy thinks it's too convenient since he doesn't know who told him to do these things. He also says he got a phone call, but he couldn't recognize the voice. So Clark does show the note to Nancy, but it's on regular notebook paper, so there's no way to identify that either. But Nancy gives him her phone number to be in touch, and Clark goes back on stage. Now the next day, Nancy goes to the Red Door Gallery, the rival art gallery in town, and she speaks to a woman, Kathy Stark, who works for Jennifer Williams. Nancy studies some of the paintings, and she says Jennifer paints with bolder, crisp colors, while Lila's are kind of muted, and Jennifer's gallery is more modern, whereas Lila's has more antique touches. So they're kind of in a similar field, doing these watercolor paintings, but they have very different styles. So Nancy and Kathy chat, and Nancy picks up on the rivalry between Lila and Jennifer. When Nancy asks if Lila's ever been to her gallery, Kathy says no, Lila couldn't take that Jennifer is successful and will be more successful than her one day. Yikes. So Nancy asks if she can meet Jennifer, and Kathy goes to get her. Nancy talks to the artist and asks if she knows Lila, and Jennifer says yes, they detest each other. But Jennifer says one day Lila will get taken down a peg or two, and she says she'll be showing new work at the exhibit, and she thinks Lila will be shocked. So Nancy wonders what she means by that. So Nancy next goes to the Cramer Gallery, and there's only one car there compared to the 6 at the Red Door. So Nancy wonders if maybe Jennifer is solid competition for Lila. So when she gets inside, Rodney is dusting some paintings, and Nancy asks where Leanne is, and he snaps he isn't her keeper. This guy has such an attitude. So Nancy finally just asks Rodney why he's so angry, and at first he denies it, but then he admits he hates Lila. So Nancy asks why he's still working there at the gallery, and Rodney says he thought Lila would be his mentor, but he showed her a painting, and she said there wasn't any emotion in it. And Rodney says, I'll show her emotion. So after this, Nancy goes to the bus station to check locker 330, and it's empty. The painting has already been taken by whoever told Clark to put it there. But when she gets home, she hears the phone ringing and she goes to answer it. And someone says, if you care for your health, you'll stop your investigation at the Cramer Gallery. They hang up, and Nancy can't tell if it was a man or a woman. Now, the next day, Nancy and Bess talk, and Nancy says Jennifer, Rodney, and Clark are high suspects on her list. But Bess disagrees about Clark. She seems to have a crush on him. So Nancy and Bess decide to next go see Annette at her apartment. And the outside is a little shabby, but she's made the inside really homey. Nancy asks her some questions about the gallery. But while Nancy and Bess are there, they notice a painting, and it's one that Annette did. She's actually really talented. She says her sister was going to help her pay for art school, but it never worked out. So Nancy and Bess ask if she's asked Lila if she can put some of her work at the gallery, and Annette just says no. Lila is critical of new artists. So Nancy also asks Annette if she knows Kathy well, the lady that works at Jennifer Williams' gallery, and she says no. So Nancy and Bess leave, and they're going to go eat at this place called the Hungry Fork, another oddly named restaurant in River Heights, when Nancy notices a red sedan following them. So she tries to lose it, but it comes up beside them and rams them towards the guardrail. The person in the car is wearing a hat and glasses, so it's hard to tell what they look like, and they've put dirt on their license plate, so Bess can't make out the numbers. And then they roar off past the girls. So Nancy and Bess are both shaken up by this, and they go back to the Drew residence. Hannah makes them some soup and sandwiches, and as the girls relay what happened, she says she's worried for them. So Nancy and Bess next go back to the Cramer Gallery, and they see Rodney coming in, and Nancy wonders if he might drive a red car. So Nancy and Bess are going to check the parking lot, but when they overhear Rodney talking to Lila in her office, they decide to stop and listen. Lila asks if he was late to work for an emergency, and when he says no, she gets mad at him and asks what he was doing, and Rodney says what he does in his off time is his business. Ugh, awkward. So Rodney asks why Lila doesn't just fire him, and she says she has the exhibit coming up and really needs his help, and Rodney says he'll just save her the trouble and quits right then and there. So he goes somewhere else in the gallery, maybe to collect his things, and Lila waves to Nancy and Bess after seeing them, and she leaves. After this, Leanne comes out to talk to them, and Nancy catches her up to speed and asks Leanne if she thinks Rodney could have ran them off the road or if he drives a red car. Leanne does admit that Rodney has a temper, and then Rodney himself comes out of the room behind them, and he's furious about being gossiped about. He throws a telephone book at a lamp. "I'll take bad workplace behaviors for 100, Alex." So Rodney storms out of the gallery, and Nancy decides to call home really quick, and Hannah tells her someone named Jennifer from the Red Door Gallery called, dinner will be ready soon, and to be home by 6. So Nancy and Bess go meet Jennifer after calling her back because she said she thinks she can help Nancy solve her case, but how did she even know that Nancy was solving a case? Nancy never mentioned anything about it. I mean, maybe it's just common knowledge in River Heights. I mean, Nancy is a pretty famous detective. Maybe people just assume that she's always solving a mystery, which, that's fair. But they all gather in Jennifer's office, and she says Rodney has to be the guilty one. He hates Lila. But is Jennifer just saying this so she can try to deflect from herself? I mean, that's what a smart villain would do, or maybe a really dumb villain, depending on how you look at it. But Jennifer tells them she met Rodney a while ago, and he was excited about working for Lila until she didn't mentor him. But he came to Jennifer looking for work. She couldn't afford to hire anyone back then, but then Jennifer shows Nancy something truly crazy. The Lila painting that Clark Drummond got the other day, the one that he was told to leave in the locker at the bus station. Jennifer says Rodney brought it to her and told her this would be the start of Lila's undoing. So Nancy and Bess leave, mulling this over, and in the parking lot they see a red car matching the one that ran them off the road in Jennifer's garage. It's hard to tell if it's the same one, but Nancy says she wants to go back in Jennifer's office and poke around. So Nancy and Bess sneak into Jennifer's office, and they have to hide in a closet. When they sneak to go back out of the office, Nancy sees a handwritten note that matches the handwriting on Clark's note that he received that told him to be a distraction. So Nancy and Bess get a call from Clark after this, and he says he's being told to do a job again and take more of Lila's paintings, and he asks what he should do. So Nancy tells him to do it. She and Bess are going to have a stakeout and watch from the second floor while Clark and Leanne load up 10 or so paintings to do what the anonymous person said to do. So Nancy and Bess are going to tell Clark, but someone locks them upstairs. So Nancy and Bess bang on the door, but Leanne can't hear them from down in the parking lot. Nancy tries dropping papers out the window, but nothing gets their attention. But Nancy does find an interesting paper and sticks it in her pocket. Now when Nancy and Bess are finally let out by Leanne, Clark has driven off and Lila comes in and is beside herself, but Nancy tells them all to get in the car with her. So they go to the telephone booth that Clark was told to go to for further instructions, then they follow him again once he's moving. A red car falls in behind them as they're driving behind Clark. So Clark puts the paintings in a barn like he was instructed to, and the girls wait to see who comes and gets them, and it's Annette. Annette Williams Hoops is an artist and Jennifer Williams' sister, the owner of the rival art gallery. She, Jennifer, owns the red car, but it turns out Annette tried to run them off the road. She hired Clark to be a distraction, and she took the paintings. Annette, it turns out, wanted to be an artist. Her sister couldn't pay for her art school because she was a struggling artist herself, and basically Annette blamed Lila for everything. So she gets arrested, and that's basically the end of the book. This book kind of wrapped up really fast at the end. So now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call What's Cooking. So in this book, there were mentionings of Hannah's coffee cake, which that sounds phenomenal, lasagna, baked chicken, tea, peanut butter, honey, and banana sandwiches, never tried that one, Hannah's homemade vegetable soup, and fried chicken. Now let's go on to a little segment that I like to call Add That to Your Resume. So I said Nancy could be a dressing room crasher. She literally just went into Clark's dressing room at the theater and was just snooping around. Tracing aficionado. She traced letters and she found a clue. And I just said portrait model. Nancy was, again, a subject of a painting, and this is the second time I think this has happened in the entire series. The first time being in the Mystery of the Moss-Covered Mansion original text. So now let's talk about some things I liked and things I didn't like about the Picture Perfect mystery. So the things I liked, I loved the art gallery setting. I thought that was really neat. The things I didn't like, I thought this mystery wrapped up a little too neatly. None of the characters were really super memorable except Rodney. He had a temper on him. He loved to throw telephone books. But I also miss George and Ned in this mystery. I love when George, Bess, and Ned are all involved in the mystery, so I kind of miss them. And when it comes to giving this book a rating, I would probably give it a 2 magnifying glasses. It was okay. I liked it. It was a pleasant read, but I wouldn't say it's my favorite. So that concludes this week's episode of True Drew Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. For next week's episode, we're going to jump into another Nancy Drew computer game. So I always love when we get to do these episodes, and this episode is going to be on game number 9, Danger on Deception Island, which happens to be one of my favorite games, and it's kind of fitting because in just 3 or 4 months, I get to go on a Clue Crew themed trip that Hannah, Nancy Drew Nerd on Instagram, is putting on, and it's Danger on Deception Island themed, so we're going to be in Washington State, and it's going to be so much fun. So I will see you guys next week for that episode, and hopefully I can do a walkthrough of this on YouTube soon, and I also need to do a walkthrough for the Haunted Carousel, so stay tuned for that also. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of True Drew Podcast. Can't get enough of the podcast? Then check out my subscription series, True Drew Files, available on Apple and Spotify. For Nancy Drew books and merchandise, you can check out my website, www.truedrewpodcast.com. For business inquiries, you can contact me at truedrewpodcast@gmail.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at True Drew Podcast.